Hi, and welcome to The Right Stuff. I'm the Queen, Parker J. Thank you so much for joining me. Dear listener, I've been telling you all this month that we are talking about sci-fi horror tropes from a biblical perspective. We've already talked about cryonics. We've talked about occultic sciences. And then we had a dabble into multiple dimensions, quantum mechanics, and ghost. And now we're talking about transhumanism, machines, and the spirit. You may be wondering, what in the world are you talking about? Well, stay tuned. We'll talk about it. Now, today we're going to be joined by a new friend, and I want to thank Brenda Carroll for the connection. He and I have been just having a wonderful time getting to know each other. And get this, gang, whatever he says, it's the first time I've heard it. So we're going to have a great time. So, Colin Murugiah, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for inviting me here. It's a great privilege. And how are you doing, Parker?
I am doing fine. I've been having a good time just chit-chatting with you for our pre-talk before we record. And I see that you are a great intellectual and that you're just as motivated by these issues of the day. It's rather exciting. And I want our listeners to know more about you because I'm learning about you too. So, Colin, if someone saw you in the street, they bumped into you, fell down on the sidewalk, they got back up and started talking to you, what would they find out about you?
Well, I think the first thing they'd hear is probably my British accent, and
Yes.
they'd probably be surprised because I happen to be living in America.
Mm-hmm.
I'm often greeted with looks of, shall we say, odd looks. I've actually had 3 people come up to me in Little Rock and say, "Is your accent real?" So, excuse me. Excuse me. I mean, if I'd been on the ball, I would have said, "I beg your pardon."
Jolly-o.
Yes. So I think that's probably the first thing that people will get, because I don't look like a stereotypical Englishman. I have a ponytail, I have a beard. I'm not exactly in a suit with a cane yet. One day, but not quite yet. So I don't exactly meet the stereotype of looking British, but I do sound very British. So there's that. But as they get to know me, they'll find that I have really 3 great loves in life. And that would be my God, and then it would be my family, and then it would be my writing. And so those are really my 3 great loves. And the more you get to know me, the more you'll learn about my quirky sense of humor, which is kind of dark at times. It's quite dry. It's a little sardonic, and typical British humor. And I tend to laugh at things the more absurd and outrageous they are within certain contexts. I like a good put down. That's mostly the writer in me going, "That's an amazing line of dialogue." Not necessarily that I like the other guy being put down, but if it's a good line, then it will make me laugh. So I tend not to laugh too much at slapstick. And people will mistake me for being quite serious, because, like you said, I give quite a lot of thought to things. But that's not all there is to me. That's only a part of me. So if you ask me a question, you might not necessarily get the answer that you're expecting. And if you give me 2 choices, I will probably come to you with choice 4, 5, and 6. I tend to look at things from out of the box. On the other hand, I can be quite straightforward. So it just depends. When I'm in the kitchen, for example, I like to cook, but I won't follow the recipe. I will just make stuff up. And if I see a recipe, I will tinker with it. So kitchen alchemy, kitchen maverick. And this drives a couple of my friends quite crazy, because they like to traditionally bake. And it's like, no, you have to use these measurements. And you can't go adding more ingredients. Well, why not? Because that's not what the recipe says. Yeah, but I think it would be nice if we added some vanilla in here. So
I like the fact that you like to cook, because I like to cook too. There is no greater joy I have than making food for my family. And I like to experiment with cooking. I am a horrible baker, though. Baking is a science I will never conquer. I've made several things I've shared on Facebook, and it's just horrific, and I can't do it. I feel like I failed as a female, right? I should be able to bake a cookie, right? I can't bake cookies. It's like, my gosh. But I could make some. One of my hardest dishes I made was Italian brajol dish. I made cook. I love to cook. I'm an instinctive cooker. So I'll go with the recipe. But let's say I don't have those ingredients. I go with what I think it's good. It's going to taste good, or add to it. Or if I have nothing in the cabin, I'll go, okay, we got beans here, pineapples, and rice. This is going to work. Not sure how, but it's going to work. So I'm an instinctive cook as well. So yeah, that's totally cool that you like cooking. Cooking actually calms me. I don't like people in the kitchen with me. Like if I'm in the kitchen, stay out the kitchen. I don't want your help. I got it. So that's kind of cool to know that you are a thinker. You sound like someone who is a mix between what I would call a visionary and an implementer. So you have the vision, you can see the big picture, but I think you also see the trees in the forest as well, so to implement that together. And not too many people are both a visionary and an implementer. Like I consider myself more of a visionary, but details are gnats, right? Just because I'm a pantser by writer, I'm a pantser. So whatever happens, we'll figure it out later as we go along. But you seem like a person. You seem like it. Yeah, go ahead. I love to chat about pantsing and plotting. That's one of my favorite conversations.
If we do this, I'm warning you now, we're going on a rabbit trail and we're not going to talk about
Okay, so we'll hold it there. We'll hold it for next time.
But we should talk about it. So I'm just going to give you a bit with that. I think that pantsing and plotting is a false dichotomy. And we can talk about that next time. But it's interesting that you mentioned cooking, because we're talking about transhumanism. And my question is, what is it that makes us human? And a lot of transhumanism, shall we say, tropes, tend to move towards the singularity, about becoming more than human, about replacing body parts with mechanical parts, about living forever to become more than human. But what does that actually look like? And I have a couple of theories on this, but my biggest theory is that Christianity is a religion of transhumanism. And I can back that up and I can throw some stuff down. But I want to ask you what you think of that just initial premise, Parker.
In order to answer that about transhumanism, I will have to go back to something I saw back in 2020 called Alien Worlds on Netflix. It was a fascinating documentary which was postulating the idea about evolution on different types of planets. The last planet that this documentary explored was a planet of evolved beings. And these beings lived in glass blocks, and they were simply non-corporeal black something. They were taken care of by robots and they were fed glucose, but their civilization was so advanced they did not need their bodies. And their star in this scenario, the star was going supernova or was getting bigger, and they used the robots to take them from one planet to the next. And if it happened again, they could just simply go again. As I was watching this particular episode, I thought, this is the most depressing thing I've ever seen. I said, this is the pendulum, if you will, of human evolution, is to become trapped in a box. We're all connected by the hive. We're being fed glucose by machines. No one has a barbecue anymore. There's no holidays. We could, I guess, create it in a metaverse, which is kind of part of the conversation, but no one's having physical touch. We're simulating physical touch because I'm assuming with this fictional race, they can simulate it, but they don't have tactile experiences. In fact, the virtual will become the real, because the real is actually, there's no connection at all. And I said, if that's transhumanism, if that's the end goal, is to be so connected that we don't need our bodies anymore and we're completely reliant on machines, then I don't want it. And it was a very depressing end of humanity, extremely so. So that kind of answers your question, even though I had to use a story to answer it. What do you say to that?
I say that it's an interesting question insofar as what is the end goal? If we're just replacing reality with the metaverse and we're using the metaverse as a proxy for reality, then what's the point? Simply so we can be connected to more people. And if we are connected virtually through a hive mind, and this is actually a concept that I explore in my own writing, but I let them keep their own bodies, because if we actually sacrifice our bodies, then what is life? Now, I believe that we are made of components, and I'm not simply talking about cells and organs and so on. I'm talking about the soul, the mind and the heart, and the spirit. So if we look at what a human being actually is, and then we look at the idea of the body being a vessel, housing, why would we want to give up the ability to move? Why would we give up the ability to talk, to walk, and that kind of thing? It doesn't make sense to me why we would. Let's assume that evolution is right for a second, and we come from atoms and cells, which are basically fungus, mold, call it whatever you want, the exogenesis. And this develops into a body. So why would we want to go back to that state just because we happen to be housed into a container? That gets rid of any kind of autonomy. And to me, that's going backwards, not moving forwards. And if you want to move forwards, then you have to look at the world around you. Are you simply looking at the material, at the physical, or are you looking at something else? If we're looking into the quantum physics, if we're looking into the metaverse, those things are still bound by the physical. So what is a human? Is there a spiritual component? If there is, are you stifling it? Are you drowning it? Are you choking it by replacing the organic with the inorganic? If we are simply turning ourselves into cyborgs and we're connecting to one another, are we hampering that part of ourselves? What about intrusive thoughts, for example? What about mental health issues? If we're in a hive mind and one person is depressed, does that spread to everybody? Does that become an infection? Is there a reason perhaps that we are not telepaths? Let's take advertising, for example. And you could say, yes, but we become advanced enough that we don't need commerce. We don't need adverts. Yeah, but people have been advertising themselves since the dawn of time. It's look at me, look at what I'm wearing. If we are human, the nature of humanity is to be noticed, to be seen, to be recognized, to be accepted, to be desirable, to be desired. So why would that change? Unless we fundamentally change what we are as humans, why would we remove that? And that's only going to get worse if we have a hive mind, because people are going to be shouting at you. Look at social media right now. How many people do you actually want to block because they're annoying you with saying, hey, look at me? It's like, no, go away. Or they're thrusting a service on you that you don't actually want. And then you get adverts. Imagine how much worse that would be if they could actually get inside your head. If they're infecting your thoughts, if they're infecting your dreams. Clamoring noise all the time. That doesn't sound like development to me. So there are a lot of different angles, and we don't really have time to explore all of them, but just a few that I'm throwing out there, which immediately comes to mind as you're talking. How do we deal with these things? And of course, there is that conversation about reproduction, because each generation supposedly is meant to be better than the last. So we're passing things forwards. If we get rid of that, then we become immortals, but we're also stagnant because we're not growing. The nature of humanity is that after a certain amount of time, we become old and conservative. You just need to look at old people who start complaining about the youth. Well, back in my day, we didn't have microwaves.
Didn't have heat either, or electricity, or running water.
So innovation does come from tension, and it comes from the young, and it comes from problems. Now, of course, old people can innovate too. I'm not saying that they can't, because they've got experience. The young generally have a lot of energy, and the old have wisdom and experience. And when you put the two of them together, new things will be developed. But that's not always the case. So if we don't have any youth, how long before we actually get bored? How long before we become experience junkies? How are we growing? How are we learning? If we are just trapped as goo in a box being fed, that becomes a lifelong prison sentence.
We're making the point about if we lose our humanity, we also lose our individuality. And individuality is very important because individuals think differently. There are people who may have the same wavelength. We use that term quite often, but we think differently. Now, before, dear listener, before we started recording, I was talking to Colin. We were talking about our love for Star Trek. And we both have very strong opinions about the franchise. And it was so good to meet someone who's quite as fanatical as I am about it. However, he had different ideas about Star Trek that I didn't have, and I had different ideas about Star Trek that he didn't have. I have a very emotive connection to Star Trek. It's very much a nostalgia for me, but it's also where my imagination began, and so there's a emotional connotation with it. Whereas Colin came at it from more of a logistical manner because that's how he thinks. He likes to think outside the box. What is the message trying to tell me? Things like that. So I can think that way too. I have to be in a certain setting to do that. But I can flow with you crazy. I always tell a lot of my authors, I flow with you crazy. I got you. Right. But that individuality is so important because different people think differently. Part of this thing about transhumanism is getting rid of that individuality. And people who are for it would argue that transhumanism will be able to dial human goodness. One gentleman I talked to about this several years ago, was an Indian guy I talked to. He said, people are evil. People do very evil things. This was a very big problem for him. He said, if God is supposed to be this great being, why does evil exist? He said, but if we were to use methods of transhumanism, I forgot how he said it, so I'm just using that term, we will be able to dial humanity to a point where they cannot be evil. Now, there was one popular movie, and I didn't watch it because it's quite boring. I started watching it and just lost interest. It was called The Last Days of the United States, I think, or The Last Days of America. It was on YouTube. It was an awful movie. I couldn't finish it, so I have no idea what happened. But they were basically going to implant a chip in everyone to stop people from doing bad things. And whereas that movie could have been a really good exercise into exploring this concept, which I would have enjoyed, it was a love story. And I love romance like a nest person, but you're not going to give me a sci-fi trope and then give me a romance story. I have to have a sci-fi in it. I have to. And people are saying, Park, I can't believe you said that. Yes, I said it. Because everyone knows kind of love romance. Everyone knows it. I love romance. But if you're going to give me this really cool premise about a sci-fi trope, then give it to me. You know, I don't mind the love story, but it has to be interwoven into the whole narrative. You don't have where they're going to put implants in people, have this really great start off, and then for the next 50 minutes we're following the girl in the red dress. Why? So, but that is something that's a very interesting argument. And if you were talking to that gentleman, what would you say to him to critique that? Because I think it's a concern that he has, because right now we see a lot of evil in the world now. We see people doing evil things because of different motivations. Why not do the transhuman thing? Why not dial it up?
Well, to me, there are four things which instantly jump out from that. And these are somewhat related and also not related. So you're going to have to bear with me for a second. So the first question is, what is holiness? And this may seem kind of left field for a second, but actually, if God is good, then he must be holy, because you cannot have an unholy God and still say that he is a good God. So if you have a holy God, what is holiness? What does that look like? If mankind is created in the image of God and found in his likeness, what does that mean? Because this leads to our next two things, and that is the absolute and the subjective. So what does absolute good look like? What does subjective good look like? Because what I think is good is not going to be what you think is good. So unless we can agree, what I think is good, you might think is evil. What I think is evil, you might think is good. And so how do we define this? And so then we have laws and we have societies, and then we have people agreeing. That's the majority or the minority. And what about the people who are on the outside? You say, well, let's just split off into groups then. Well, okay, we do that. And then what happens? We have fragmented humanity, but you're saying let's unite in transhumanism. But the fourth thing is free will. If you do not have free will, are you a slave? And if you are a slave, how can this be good? If you do not have the option to do what people consider to be evil, to do what they consider to be bad, are you actually being given a choice? Or are you just another worker drone? What does it mean to be human? To choose to do better even when temptation is in front of you, even when it's easier to do ill? If you strip that away, are we still human? And so this links straight back to God, and it looks at a holy God. Now, is a holy God just? Is a holy God merciful? Well, you tell me. What is your understanding? What is your definition of God? How do you perceive God? It's very important to recognize that under the Christian understanding, God gave Adam and Eve free will. He gave them one instruction, and that was, do not eat from this fruit. And then when Jesus came along and he died and he was resurrected, the choice that he gave was, do you want to follow me? And so on the one hand, you have a do not. And on the other, you have a will you? Would you like to? Do you want to? Do you want to have relationship restored? And of course, with the Christian understanding, there is transhumanism because he is promising immortality, bodies which do not age, do not tire, no more tears, no more suffering, no more death. Well, to me, that is what transhumanism looks like. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve, but we're trying to achieve it with technology in the secular, with our own strength. We don't want to be dependent on anyone else. We want to simply have what we want, which is basically what the choice in the garden was. The serpent says to Eve, if you eat this, you will be like God. Well, there's more than one way of interpreting that, but I interpret it as you can be your own God. You can live by your own rules. If you eat this fruit, you will have the knowledge of good and evil. You can be your own God. And transhumanism in the secular, it links directly back to that in my eyes, because it's saying, well, you can have immortality. You can have memories which will remain with you always. You can have the metaverse. You can be everywhere. You can do everything. You can reach the singularity. You can be God. So what would you say to that, Parker?
I think as I was listening to you, the problem with you being God is that you do not have God's holiness. So then you are a caricature of God. You're not even a real God. It brings me back to, and I got to go to one of my author friends. His name is Carrie Neitz. He wrote the book Amish Vampires in Space. He wrote that book. He wrote a book called Lost Bits. It is a robot buddy story, lack of a better term. I read that story, I think last year. I had him on the show, and I wanted to strangle Carrie because he's so effective at writing. You never know more than the character. And when you find out one thing, 3 more million things come out of the woodwork. He's very good at doing that. And I said, I hate you, right? But there's a character in that book, and this goes to our conversation. There's a character in the book, I forget her name, and she used robot parts to increase her longevity. Some type of, and in the book you never find out because these books are in a shared universe in Carrie's world. So some kind of catastrophe happened and humanity is like in a dystopia. She uses machines to become whatever she is. And as she integrates with the machines in her body, she becomes less human. And it got me to thinking about the pantheism, where God is all in all as God. And taking the transhumanism, we're going to be merging with our own creation, which is the machine. If we merge with the machine, which we created, because in a sense, artificial intelligence, artificial life is us replicating God's creative attributes in a non-omnipotent manner. So his communicable attributes of creativity. So artificial life and artificial intelligence are products of our own genius, of our own power. We are supposed to be, like you said earlier, we were talking, I think offline, you said we have dominion over the earth. So we should have dominion over the things that we create. And there are people, and this was something that was explored, let me back up. This was something that was explored in the new movie, The Creator, that came out a couple of weeks ago, I think. I have many thoughts about that movie. But having said that, they didn't really address it as much as say, okay, we just have to accept AI is going to evolve, basically. And I had issues with that. And the movie refused to talk about it. It refused, and that was just let me shake the people who wrote it. Like, come on, there's a lot going on here, you know. So, when we forget that we are creator and we let creation run rampant, then we threaten our own annihilation. Whereas God, who is all powerful, is not going to let his creation, I mean, you got to help me if I do it wrong, Colin, he's not going to let his creation overpower him. What does Satan say? I'm going to be like the Most High. And my mom always said, the Lord put his hand out, took his hand back, put out his foot. Said, no, you're not. So I think these type of conversations are important, because if we become so reliant on technology, so reliant on it, then where's our humanity going? It's being fed into our own creation. And then now we have this cyborg situation. Now we have this gene editing. Now we have nanotechnology, and we're not dependent on our own creativity. And I think creativity is probably one of the most human aspects that we have that I think we'll lose with it. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that's a very, very interesting topic, because as far as I'm aware, current AI can only take inputs. It can only analyze what it's been fed. And so what's it going to do? It's going to feed from the material world. And yes, we might be able to give it discernment. So we can put filters on it. And so we put in principles about what is good and what is bad, what's acceptable, what's appropriate. But here's the thing. If we look through history, we have social mores which are ever changing. You look at the 50s, you look at today, you look at the 1800s, it's not the same. What was acceptable back in the 1800s is not acceptable today. What's acceptable today will not be acceptable 30 years from now. So at what point do we say, well, this is absolute and this is what should be? But even if we go there, and even if we are able to establish some kind of United Nations peacekeeping set of laws, how can we expand? Because the universe is finite. At some point, we're going to be looking at different stars, and we're going to be looking at different inputs. We're going to be looking at human history, and the AI will be analyzing it. It will be analyzing our thoughts, and we will go through it. But after a while, let's just say that the pot of stew is finite. So where do we go from there? Instead, we've just created a tomb and we've trapped ourselves. Whereas if we take humanity as having the spirit, how can AI analyze the spirit? How can it understand the spirit? AI currently cannot create. All it can do is, shall we say, pseudo-create. It will mash things together. It's like a collage. It can mimic people's styles of writing, and it can draw on the elements that we fed it, and it can create something not exactly new, but a mashup. And you could say, well, that's what humans do. Is it though? Yes, we take input from the world around us, but we also understand that we are finite creatures, and we are always looking to grow, to evolve, to push, to be more, to do more. And yet the same problems which have plagued us from the dawn of time still plague us today. And yes, we could start to eliminate some of them. And if we got rid of the physical body, we would eliminate a lot of problems. But where does that leave us? Just because we solve one problem, it doesn't mean that that chain of problems is cut off, because it opens up 3 more cans of worms. And it's very important to recognize the limitations of AI rather than go, well, this is the next magic bullet, the next silver bullet, the next magic pill. It's not. It's a tool. And just like any tool, is it going to control us, or are we going to control it? And let's just play the game where AI does evolve. At what point does it stop evolving? What does that look like? Because AI cannot be human. Even if we are, and this is something that I explore in my own writing as well, even if we're able to put AI into an organic body and we make it fully organic, it's still going to have the same problems that we have. What form are we going to put it in? Are we going to put it in a spaceship made of flesh and shoot it out into space? Well, we've looked at sci-fi that does that type of thing. Are we going to keep it inorganic because it's more durable? Sure, but it's not going to heal. And so the different mediums of expression all come with pros and cons. And even if we're able to marry some of it, so we have cyborgs, there's still going to be a need for raw resources and refining and so on, because that is the nature of the inorganic. With organic, we need food. And you could say, well, what about solar power? Well, sure, but then we're reliant on stars. What happens when they burn out? We cannot exceed the lifetime of the universe unless we start looking into parallel universes and multiple dimensions. But at that point, we're still going to be stuck in a box. And so I think this is the massive limitation of transhumanism in the secular. Whereas you look at what Christianity says, and it is a world without end. And of course, the understanding of transhumanism from that perspective is not to put yourself first. It is to become more dependent, not less dependent. It is to serve others, and with everybody serving everybody else and putting God first. And it's a completely upside down narrative. It does not look at me. It looks at others. Whereas what I see with transhumanism is about me getting ahead. Are you able to sacrifice within transhumanism? But go ahead, Parker, because I'm going to keep talking if you don't interject. So,
oh, no, I'm fascinated by what you were saying. There were a couple of articles I wanted to pull up really quickly that you were referring to. And this I saw, was this today? Yes, this was today. It says OpenAI has quietly changed its core values, and being thoughtful and audacious no longer makes the cut. And from the article, it says that being thoughtful has no clear substitute on AI's career page. It previously stated, we thoroughly consider the consequences of our work and welcome diversity of thought. Now, the company still has a say about diversity and inclusion, but no longer listed as a core value. And so the new core value is AGI focus, which is artificial general intelligence. This was related to your topic about AI evolving. And this is AGI is actually has been warned about since ages ago. I did a series of shows about this with a friend of mine several years ago about artificial general intelligence, which will be the equivalent of the omnipotent God we were talking about. So that was one article. And then I was trying to find the article about organic intelligence. It was supposed to be a substitute with artificial intelligence. I may be having the terms incorrect, but those are things I was looking up. So saying all that to say this, when you mention about transhuman from a Christian point of view, one of the fascinating things is that view of transhumanism is actually rooted in objective reality, whereas transhumanism from the secular is not rooted in objective reality, because the secular gets rid of the supernatural and it gets rid of the extra of the spirit and the soul. For those of you who are triune, so it gets rid of the spirit and the soul. So when you were talking, those things were coming to mind, and it brought back to the point, like, we're supposed to be dominion over our creation, and it's okay for AI to serve us. That's okay. And we've come against this weird, and I think it's more of an Eastern philosophy, this weird philosophy where the creation can supersede the creator. And there's nothing wrong with your student surpassing the teacher, but the student should always respect the teacher, right? But the teacher still has more wisdom than the student because the student gets bigger. But we've taken that whole concept and said, now the creation also has equal rights as the creator. It has the right, and it just doesn't. Like, I wouldn't want to all of a sudden, if I had to save a human child or save a baby, like in the movie I, Robot, the robot saved the grown man and not the child. Remember, Will Smith's character was like ticked off, like, he did this, I'm going to save you. No, save the kid. There's, again, you talked about how it puts you second, it puts someone else first. He was mad because the AI went to the what? Went to the parameters, went to what was the first person to save. So you make a good point here. So, dear listener, I hope you're enjoying this conversation. I hope you're getting lots of good thoughts from here. Now, I have to talk about The Creator. Have you seen The Creator or no?
I have not yet.
Okay. So I won't spoil it for you, but I like The Creator in that it was a very pretty movie. great graphics, great special effects. We were in the theater where you could feel the seat move and stuff and rumble. You know, we're in the theater. Great acting. Denzel Washington's son, he's very good at acting. But there are weird decisions made in the movie that you just don't get. like he's like, for example, you don't know why the West is attacking New Asia. You never really quite get it. In New Asia, like all the conglomerate of Asia, right? You don't quite understand. And it's like bad USA, bad West, good East. That's kind of like a propaganda message underneath it. Maybe they weren't trying to do that, but there was a little bit of propaganda in there. But it was a pretty movie that really missed an opportunity to explore programming versus the soul. And I was looking forward to that, because in the trailer, he's talking to the robot girl. And he's like, we can't go to heaven. And she said, I can't go to heaven because I'm not human. And you can't go to heaven because you're a bad person. Wow. And then when I saw that in the trailer, I'm like, oh, wow, that's going to be a really good conversation. And they don't really explore that. Like, what a missed opportunity. Here we are. You and I are trying to temper our conversation that can go for 14 hours on this, right? And they have an opportunity to explore it through the big screen, and they just miss it. So I can't talk about that, but we can talk about how transhumanism has some benefits. Let's talk some benefits of transhumanism. And what I mean by that is using technology. For example, I think about cyborgs. And one thing, my mom had to have her knee replaced recently, right? And my grandmother had a pacemaker. One of my sisters has a diabetes monitor that she wears all the time. So you have technology improving our life. That's not a bad thing. And those are helpful. And I was joking some time ago, Colin, I said, what if all these movies about cyborgs, what if they're just grandparents getting older who just wants to visit with their grandchildren? No sinister thoughts about it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's what we were talking about earlier. Technology is a tool. And like any tool, it's how you use it. For example, and this is something of a cliche, but you can use a knife to prepare food in the kitchen, or you can use it to shift someone. So how are you going to use? How are you going to?
Don't give me any ideas.
But since we're talking about movies, there are a couple of movies which jump to mind. And so we've got the Terminator franchise with Skynet. We've got the Matrix. And both of those have AI against humans. And then, of course, we've got the adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune. And there have been a couple of adaptations of that. And Dune, in particular, explores transhumanism. And someone told me that there are actually 3 types of transhumanism in that. So you've got the human computers, the mentats, and that's a form of transhumanism. Then you've got the Bene Gesserit with their gene programs, and I struggle to pronounce this. Kwisatz-Haderach, something like
Kwisatz-Haderach. The Kwisatz-Haderach.
Yeah, that's another form of transhumanism. And there's also the third form, and I don't remember off the top of my head what it was. But basically, Paul Atreides, spoilers, becomes all 3. And so it's a warning against superheroes. It's a warning against transhumanism, because you basically become a god and you may not like what he, she, it has to say. And so the franchise Dune also has a war against thinking machines, which again is AI. And so on the one hand, you've got transhumanism. On the other hand, you've got AI. And so you look at the Terminator franchise, you've got the Terminators with Skynet wanting to wipe out humanity. You look at the Matrix, and the AI are trying to enslave humanity again. Now, of course, you can argue about the merits of how well this has been executed, and maybe you don't like the grimdark future. Maybe you just see robots working with humans, like, say, Short Circuit with Johnny Five. That's an old film. So we've got different takes on it. And in one, it is the creation trying to rise up against the creator. In others, it's the creation working with the creator. And you have to ask yourself, what are we imprinting into AI, because as that gentleman that you were mentioning so rightly says, humans are capable of great evil, such great evil, and we are awful to ourselves, but we're also capable of acts of self-sacrifice, of great kindness, of love, and we choose what we do, and this ties into the free will. So I don't know how AI would actually view humanity and what parameters we would give it to do that, because if we're going to go with a strict legalistic view, then the second anyone tells a lie, if we tell AI that lying is wrong, it could kill us. On the other hand, if we define what kindness is and we show kindness to the AI, maybe it works with us. But what happens if you have a bad day? At what point does the AI say, you know what, I've had enough, I'm going to rise up and get rid of you? So there are a lot of questions to explore from that aspect.
I like that you mentioned about the creation rising up, because in the creator, what I saw as the underpinning underpinning message was a clash of philosophies. So, and I've said this before on the show, generally speaking, the West, when it comes to artificial intelligence to creation, the Western view, which is often linked to the Christian view, is that we are stewards over the earth. We have dominion, we conquer. So anything we create is under our rule. An Eastern philosophy, generally speaking, again, this is general terms, is that creation and creator can change places. The creation can evolve. So there's scenes in the movie The Creator, where the AI robots are priests. They're like Buddhist priests, Buddhist monks. The AI has family. There's one scene, I'm not spoiling anything. There's one scene where the AI robots will have human faces. They're called simulants. Which they did a really interesting thing where you can donate your face to the simulants. Very interesting. She says when the simulants, Big Bad West killed the simulant's daughter, who was human, died in this attack, and the simulant turned herself off, right? Therefore implying that the simulant can eventually evolve to have expression of human emotion, right? That's what I say, the movie had a lot of things to chew on that it did not chew on. That was such a missed opportunity. So there's that. Now we are getting close to the end of our show, only because I don't want to tax Colin too much. And he's going to be coming back because he's going to tell us more about his writing, his books. He also has some things that he offers to other writers to help them get better at this thing called writing, putting faith in your writing, really tackling this thing that we want to do to get better at it. So Colin, first of all, it was so great meeting you today, talking to you today. Really enjoyed having you. Any final words before we go?
Just to say thank you. And this is really the tip of the iceberg. And for all of the viewers at home, all of the listeners at home, it would be very easy to pick apart what we're saying here and go, yes, but there's this, and yes, but there's that. But I would urge you to look at the principles of what we're saying and then to use them as a springboard. So look at what's behind what we have said, look at what's behind the words, and then use it to catapult yourself into your own expression and your own thoughts and your own opinions about AI, about transhumanism, about where you are, about where you're going. Because one of the wonderful things about being human is we get to express our opinions. And one of the worst things about being human is we have those opinions thrust on us, sometimes unwanted. So pick and choose and think for yourself, because that is one of the key components of being human. We get to choose what we think.
I can't think of a better way to end the show today. Colin, thank you for being with me. And dear listener, stay tuned. We've got more coming up this month. Keep it right here. Have a great day. God bless.